I want to jump right into today's topic, which is the three most overlooked causes of bloating, gas, and stomach distension, aka the three most common causes of digestive issues. So let's go ahead and jump in to this topic, talking about these three most overlooked causes. Because we don't need to be dealing with this painful bloating every single day, right? We don't need to be dealing with all of this. And chances are, if we have been suffering from digestive issues in the past, we are suffering potentially even more now, right? We're like stuck in our houses, the stress is higher, all of these things. So super important to address them, yeah? Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into these three things. I call them the three S's, right? And then there will be a little bonus too. So number one is going to be stress. Yeah, stress is something that is so not talked about enough in this space, right? We talk a lot about it in regards to like mental health and anxiety, but we do not talk about it enough in regards to like physical health, right? So stress can actually really negatively hinder the digestive system and then therefore lead to bloating. So I could do like a whole hour-long topic or talk on this topic alone, but to wrap it up, basically this is what happens. So when we are in a state of stress, the body enters fight or flight, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. When the body enters a state of fight or flight, all of the blood flow is actually sent out to the extremities into like our leg muscles, our arm muscles, things like that, so we can really run away and protect ourselves, right? Digestion is part of the parasympathetic nervous system response, and that's why it's called rest and digest, right? When we are entered into the state of fight or flight, into the stress response, the digestive process is really just like shut off. It's not a priority, right? When that happens, stress is really just turned off, right? And what happens then? Food starts to sit in the stomach, food starts to sit in the gut way longer than it should be. And that alone can lead to bloating, right? So something that I think is so important to talk about is stress management. I mean, stress management should be a part of a gut health program. It's not just about the food. And this is why I see things like, people doing Whole30 or people doing other things like this, and it really not working because we're not addressing all of the issues here, right? It takes a holistic approach. Health is holistic. That's why I'm a holistic health coach. And if you're new here today, welcome. My name is Hannah. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. And I am a certified holistic health coach and a gut health expert. And I help women all around the world really ditch the digestive distress, ditch the never-ending bloating, even when they feel like they've tried everything before, ditch the skin conditions, and feel at home in their bodies again. So welcome, and please say hi in the comments. If you're new, if you've been here before, let me know where you're tuning in from, all the goods. So going back to that, stress, right? Literally, the digestive system, the digestive process is completely slowed down when we're in a state of stress. And this stress can be caused by tons of different things, right? It can be caused by a work email that we got from our boss that's like has us feeling a bit scared. It can be caused by a physical stressor, like an inflammatory stressor in the body, right? Making, it's all holistic. It's like this vicious circle, right? So if we're eating something that we're sensitive to, if we're eating something that isn't supportive to the body, then we're going to be triggering inflammation in the system. This inflammation, therefore, then triggers stress in the body. It's a stressor, right? So we have to address all of these little pieces to the circle. Let me know if this is making sense. Let me know if this feels confusing to you or if you have questions along the way. I got you, right? But it's so important to exit out of this fight or flight response to enable the body to really do its thing. And this was actually a huge part of my personal story, was that I was like subconsciously looping these old traumas in my life, some childhood trauma, some stressors, things like that. I was just looping them around in my brain. And I was never able to really fully heal my digestive system because, regardless of the food that I was eating, right? Because subconsciously I was replaying these really traumatizing memories over and over in my brain. And my fight or flight response was like constantly turned on and never turned off. So it didn't matter what I ate. My digestive system could never fully work. And this then therefore leads to bloating, leads to distension, leads to gas, right? The body is trying to process this food and we're not really allowing it to. So stress is the I think the number one most overlooked cause of this bloating, right? People don't talk about it enough. Once again, we talk about it in the way of stress, altering our mental health, but we don't really look at how it physically actually alters our gut health, our physical health, our digestive health, right? And as we know, as I've said many, many times before, like once we have an issue with our digestive system, once we have an issue with our gut health, it leads to a myriad of other issues. It doesn't really, it can show up as anything. It can show up on the skin. It can show up, of course, as gas and bloating and stomach distension, but it can show up as acne, eczema. It can show up as joint pain. It can show up as eventually an autoimmune condition, right? So there are so many things going on. So the bloating really shouldn't just be like tossed to the side and be like, oh, it's no big deal. Like it's really something that we should look at. Occasional bloating after eating like fried food or like a ton of broccoli or something, not a big deal, right? Bloating constantly, definitely something that we want to take a look at. So stress is that number one overlooked thing. So, and it's heightened during this time, right? With everything going on in the world. So how do we really get through this, and how do we just make it through the day without entering this and living in this response, right? In this fight or flight response. It starts with things like breath work. It starts with things like meditation, right? Going for long walks, tapping into your own energy. Things like this are incredibly important to exit out of that fight or flight response. And what I do with my students is we take a look at rewiring some neural pathways so we are able to exit out of these old stories that we tell ourselves that are creating this stress in the body that we're not even aware of, right? Because this, once again, affects our physical gut health. So it's really, really important to take a look at the role that stress is playing in our lives. And on top of that, I know that, when we get to the point where we're eating foods and it feels like it doesn't even matter what we eat, but it triggers something in our body, we're scared to eat anything, right? Because we're having these reactions, negative reactions to all these kinds of foods that we kind of are like so overwhelmed, we don't even know what to do. That becomes a stressor too, right? That kind of becomes a trauma in the body because we're so scared to eat anything. So it's so important that we really look at all of these different angles when we are addressing our gut health, because it's going to help us get rid of the symptoms, get rid of those digestive issues, of the gas, of the bloating, of the stomach distension, of the acid reflux, all of those kinds of things. Yeah. So the number one overlooked thing that I see people really not talking about enough, especially like, doctors and medical professionals, this isn't even taken into account, right? And it's such a huge game changer. So number one is going to be stress. Let me know if this is making sense to you. Let me know in the comments. Yeah. The second thing is snacking. Okay. So I could talk about this for a very long time because I feel very passionately about it, but there is a ton of conflicting information out there, right? There are lots of experts advising us to eat 6 small meals a day to keep our metabolisms revved up, and some other people that are promoting like fasting for 24 hours, right? So to say that like this overload of information and making you feel like you can never make a decision is like, it's definitely a part, right? Like to say that it's no problem is like an understatement, right? All of this is so overwhelming. We're told these different things constantly. As a holistic health coach and someone that specializes in gut health, I see tons of people with gut dysfunction. So they're having trouble digesting their food properly. They're always bloated. They've got bad skin conditions. They're potentially dealing with things like SIBO, leaky gut, IBS. And I look at the body through the gut, through the lens of the gut, because as you know, if you pay attention to anything, and since you're here, you do, the gut is the epicenter of our health. So the hard truth is that snacking can have a negative impact on your gut, and it could be the reason for your issues, for all of this bloating, and for poor nutrient absorption, right? Which then again leads to all of these other issues because we're not absorbing any of the nutrients in the body that we need to live. We need to build strong bodies, right? So why is this the case, right? It really comes down to this extremely powerful but like highly underutilized MMC pathway, which is the migrating motor complex. So I'll get into a little bit of the science and then we'll just break it down so it's really like applicable for you and something that you can start like tomorrow, because I love a good action step. Okay, so the MMC, once again, migrating motor complex, is a cyclical recurring motility pattern that occurs in the stomach and the small bowel, so the small intestine. The complex can be divided into 4 phases, of which phase 3 is the most active, with a burst of contractions originating. I don't need to get into all the science with you guys. Point is, it happens in the small intestine, right? And it's basically like a cleaning crew for your gut. It pushes these left behind food particles and bacteria out of the small intestine. So it's different from peristalsis, right? Which is a series of muscle contractions that move food through the digestive tract. The MMC pathway, which I'm talking about here, is activated only when you haven't eaten in a while. So in a state of fasting, right? And it stimulates your small intestine, pancreas, and gallbladder to sweep out the excess bacteria and really like clean house. And this entire process takes about 3 hours and 45 minutes. So the key takeaway here is that the MMC only activates during a fasting state between meals and overnight, right? And it relies on our nerve cells to turn it on. So it's turned off as soon as food enters the system. So what does this really mean, right? It means that when we're snacking all day, or if we're eating those 6 small meals a day or whatever it is, we're never letting this MMC pathway do its thing. And this can lead to bloating. It can lead to gas. It can lead to stomach distension, right? This is why, especially if we're already dealing with a sensitive gut and we're already dealing with some of these issues, spacing out these meals more can make such a huge difference, and it gives our gut a break. It lets our body kind of do its thing, and it helps push out that excess bacteria, right? And when that excess bacteria doesn't get pushed out, we end up with something like SIBO, which is way more serious, right? And very finicky to handle and deal with. I've worked with a lot of women that have suffered from SIBO for years and were able to get a hold of it, thank goodness. But they've been through a lot. So we want to avoid getting there if possible, right? So basically, what can happen when the MMC pathway can't do its thing is, like when you're snacking all day long, right? Is things like gastroparesis, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, right? This is because the bacteria and these small particles of food get left behind in the small intestine for longer than is healthy. So this makes you feel lousy. You'll feel a heaviness after eating. You'll feel too full even if you've only had a small meal. If any of this resonates with you, let me know if you feel these things in the comments below. So again, really, a slowed MMC leads to bacteria and fungus in the gut for longer than it should be, basically. And it can lead to an overgrowth of bacteria, which is something that we definitely don't want. It can bring in a bunch of issues. And, it's important to say that we know that bacteria is good for the gut, right? We love our probiotics. We love having these good bacteria in the gut. But we want, and this is a big takeaway, this is a big thing to understand too. We want the majority of this bacteria to be in the large intestine, not the small intestine. When there's too much of it in the small intestine is when we get a lot of bloating, when we get something like SIBO. So we want most of it in the large intestine, which is also why you have to pay attention to which probiotics you get, because we want to make sure that they're actually making it there, right? And they're not just getting wiped out by the stomach acid. This can be a game changer in itself, because also it triggers all these other things, which I'm about to get into the next one. So it'll make even more sense. But let's see here. That's basically what I wanted to say there. To wrap it all up, I could go into a bunch more science around it, but we really want the MMC working, and something that doesn't allow it to fully do its thing is too much snacking or eating. This actually had a huge impact on one of my students that was in my Healing Guts and Shaken Butts course. Last round she was I was asking her, what her eating patterns were really like. And she was like, oh my gosh, I used to wake up and think that I needed to eat breakfast and put something, I would kind of force it even though I didn't really want it. And it felt early to me and whatever. And I would be bloated all day long. But I thought that was the right thing to do, right? Because breakfast is so important. It's the most important meal of the day or whatever. And she was like, then I just started I started spacing out my meals more, and I realized that the rest of my day, my bloating was so much better. There was so much less of it simply with that one. Well, she was in the whole program, so it wasn't just that one adjustment. We did many adjustments, but she was finding that honestly, eating that much and that early was actually just making her feel sick. So that's because when it's important to space out like when we eat dinner and then when we eat breakfast. And I'm not talking intermittent fasting in regards to like not eating for 18 hours, right? That's not really my number one recommendation, especially if you've been dealing with like an adrenal issue or you live a stressful life. Or like right now, we're all under like a lot of stress, right? And overwhelm. Potentially not the best idea. I also think that women are more sensitive to this because our hormones shift constantly, like every single day, all month, right? So it's something that we need to be mindful of because fasting is still a stressor on the body. So it's not my number one go-to. We just have to make sure that we're doing it the right way. AKA giving enough space between dinner and breakfast, but not like too much space. We're not trying to like starve or feel irritable or have our blood sugar all over the place or have our cortisol spike too high, right? Which can happen when we fast for too long. So if you've tried fasting and it hasn't really worked for you, that this could be why, right? Our cortisol is spiking too much. Our blood sugar is out of whack. It leaves us anxious and irritable and all those things. But that is like that's like a whole other topic that I won't get into right now. Anyway, point is, bringing it back around, we want to space out these meals between dinner and breakfast. If you're not hitting 12 hours right now, aim for 12 hours and see how you feel. Yeah, and it's pretty easy. That's 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., that kind of deal. Signs that there might be an issue with your MMC is, things like IBS, bloating, acid reflux, GERD, things like that, or even like some skin issues, right? Because there's excessive bacteria. So bringing it back around, we've got number one being stress, overlooked thing. Number two being snacking, right? And then I also want to make sure that we talk about our blood sugar regulation. So how do we even get to the point where we're not snacking all the time? We need to be full, right? We don't want to be like starving, but we actually need to feel full from our meals. So we have to be creating meals that are actually keeping us full for the 4 hours, right? Because once again, the MMC pathway is able to do its thing at around 3 hours and 45 minutes. So if we're not spacing our meals out that much, it's never able to really push through all that excess bacteria and all of those excess food particles. So we need to make sure that we're spacing our meals out at least 3 hours and 45 minutes from each other. How are we able to do that? We have to be eating meals that actually keep us full, right? Because we don't want to just be like hungry and irritable until our next meal. That's no fun. So in order to do that, we have to really stabilize our blood sugar levels and eat meals that keep us full, right? So in addition to that, when our blood sugar levels aren't regulated, when we're on this crazy roller coaster, we're hungrier sooner, right? We have more cravings for things, and they're not necessarily cravings for like broccoli, right? They're cravings for like sugar and processed carbohydrates and heavy starches, right? And we don't want that. It doesn't allow us to make a healthy, more supportive decision at our next meal when we're craving all of these things, right? If you have like big sugar cravings, this is something to look into. We want to make sure that we're optimizing your blood sugar curve, and we want to make sure that your bacteria is on point, because gut bacteria can actually cause, different kinds of gut bacteria can actually cause like sugar and carbohydrate cravings. So we want to make sure that we're working with this blood sugar curve, so we actually feel full at our meal, so we can even make it that 3 hours and 45 minutes to the next meal, right? And this is something that I don't really talk about too much, but I'm gonna start talking about it more, is that this was something that really happened to me, and I did a lot of damage to my gut over the years, y'all. I am not in this field of work for nothing. I struggled for so long, and I did research like relentlessly for like 10 years to figure this out. And throughout part of my journey, I was vegan, right? I watched a bunch of food documentaries. I got very scared and overwhelmed, and I went vegan. And I lost a ton of weight. I stopped menstruating. I had insomnia, all of these other things. But another thing that I did as well was I was like definitely underweight. I'm 5'8", and I got to, I think, 115 pounds. And it was not cool. I did not feel like very grounded in my body. There was a lot of like airy energy. It was hard for me to kind of focus. And I say this because I never felt satisfied at meals either. I needed to snack way more. And people are like, oh, it's just because you eat so healthy, right? You're just snacking on veggies all the time. And the thing is like, I was never, ever giving my digestive system a time to rest. So even though I was underweight and of a very thin frame, I still had crazy bloating because I was snacking constantly and I was putting my body under so much stress. And I had to snack constantly because I was never satisfied and I was always hungry because I wasn't optimizing my blood sugar curve, which takes a very specific formula, right? Which I teach in all of my programs. It's in my cookbook. It's in my Gut Health Guide Quarantine Edition. It's in my Healing Guts and Shaken Butts program, right? But we have to really use this full, complete formula that helps turn off over 8 hunger hormones in the body to even make it to the next meal and give that enough space, right? So on top of me not giving my body the nutrients that it really needed when I was vegan, it was like I had to eat so much more frequently, and it just totally damaged my gut because I could never really like rest it or let it do its thing, right? On top of that, my body was in an intense state of stress because I did get so underweight. Bringing it back to number one thing that we talked about, right? Which is stress. So we really have to use the right formula to balance our blood sugar curve and really support our gut health and help it make it easier on us. So we're not like starving and then trying to make it to our next meal, right? Like every single woman that takes on my program, that enters any of my work, says, wow, I was so surprised how much less I actually started eating. How my snack cravings just went away, how my sugar cravings just went away, and how I was satisfied so much more easily, right? And they were like, I was expecting to be so hungry because we take this out, and it's like a health program, and you just expect to be starving. But that's 110% not how it should be working. If you are hungry on a program constantly, it's not the right program, okay? There's no counting, there's no starving, none of that. We just have to use some science to support the body to get us there. And also, on top of that, when we stop feeling starving all the time, we stop counting everything, it's just so much, then the obsession that so many of us struggle with when it comes to food starts to wean away because the body's in a more balanced state, right? Our blood sugar levels are balanced. Our anxiety is balanced. So we end up not even thinking about the next meal because we're just like satisfied for hours. So it just like helps everything. It helps everything. It helps your relationship with food. It helps your anxiety levels. It helps your energy levels. It helps your bloating, like all of it. But a lot of things that, a lot of the response that I see from my students, because I work with a lot of women that have had very complicated relationships with food in the past. And I understand that because that was also me for years and years and years. I was on every single diet, starting at like age 14, so I get it so much. And I'm like so happy to be able to say that I haven't been on a diet in probably 4 years now, which I never even thought was possible before, but it's because I learned how to work with my body. I started working with my gut health. I started eating and living for my gut health, and I started really optimizing my blood sugar levels. And then this desire to like snack and my cravings and my kind of obsession with food started to just dwindle away because I started supporting my body in a very holistic sense. So yes, those are kind of the three, to really wrap it around, those are the three like S's that I think are the most commonly overlooked causes of bloating and distension and gas and all of these digestive issues. So number one, once again, is being stressed. Number two is going to be snacking, right? We most of us don't need to be snacking all the time. Number three is going to be, I will say sugar because it's 3 S's, right? But blood sugar dysregulation. We really want to be optimizing that blood sugar curve. I feel like I talk about this like a freaking broken record, but I see this change people's lives, and I see this like so positively benefit women's relationship with their own bodies and food so much that like I will continue to stand up on my box and talk about it and scream about it forever and ever because it changed my life, and I watch it change literally everyone else's. So these are the 3 S's. And the last thing that I really want to talk about here, because I always have to throw in a bonus, is a bacterial imbalance, right? Which I've touched on bacteria a bit throughout this. But the thing is that the bacteria in our body are what are actually causing the bloating. So our body doesn't just like bloat. It's the bacteria that releases the gases in the body that then causes bloating, right? Does that make sense? It's not just like we bloat. It's like we eat something to feed these bacteria, and then these bacteria put off gases, and that causes the bloating, right? So when we look at bloating, that's why I'm a big fan of not just like drinking a skinny tea or something, right? Because like A, it doesn't work, doesn't help you identify any issues, and I think it's a waste of money, but also because it doesn't look at the root cause, right? We're just drinking this tea and we're not addressing the fact that this bloating is coming from a bacteria. We need to address the bacteria, right? So how do we address the bacteria? We have to do a fully comprehensive gut health program. We have to really do a fully comprehensive gut repairing program. We have to get rid of the bad bacteria. We have to increase the good bacteria. We have to support it with the right kinds of foods, right? Tame down the inflammation, support the gut lining. You know, this is why you may have tried things like paleo or keto or vegan or whatever it is, and gotten results for a short period of time, but it not really worked long term, and the bloating comes back, the gas comes back, it seems to never end. You feel like you've tried everything and nothing's ever worked. It's because we're not addressing all of these things. We're not looking at every single piece of the puzzle that is necessary to really fully transform your gut health. We're still putting little band-aids on it, right? And the band-aids are cool for like a week and they don't really work anymore. So that's kind of what I had to talk about today. Feel free to ask me questions in the comments for sure, because I will get to them and answer them for you. Share this information with anyone that you think it will benefit from. If anyone deals with like bloating that never seems to go away regardless of what you try, right? This is going to be helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in today and joining me. Bye, everyone.